So starting with the things which I had on me, I wore these trail runner type shoes. They're from Innovate. I switched over from boots to trail runners earlier this year. They are much more comfortable than boots. I get less blisters. They're lighter. They're not waterproof. Your feet get wet, but they dry faster. With these, I put these Superfeet insoles on them because I didn't like the insoles which came with them, and these Superfeet ones are very comfortable. I had 3 pairs of socks going with me, which I'd rotate out through the day. I had these sort of like double layer 1,000-miler socks, I think they're called. I have some Decathlon socks, and I have some wool, smart wool socks. I also, for part of the trail, wore an ankle brace, which I got from Boots because I hurt my ankle slightly, and this was helpful. I've got a bum bag, fanny pack type thing, which I made myself using the Stitchback Designs pattern. And in this I carried lots of little bits and pieces with me, and it was a really good thing to have with me. So I had like a lighter, chewing gum, tick tweezers, lip balm, tick spray, you know, like hand sanitizer, all of that. I took a film camera with me and I kept that in this for easy access. I also kept it in this IKEA bag to keep it dry-ish when it rained. This is my jacket. It's Outkit Definition. It's pretty good. I think these 3-layer breathable waterproof things, when it rains really heavily, they're never that waterproof. So this did wet through occasionally in the heavy rain, but otherwise was good for keeping me dry and out of the wind. This is a Decathlon puffy jacket. It's synthetic, not down, so you don't have to worry about getting it wet, and is good for keeping you warm, and I like it. This is my sort of like base layer top. It's a icebreaker merino base layer long sleeve top. I've got a hat for keeping the sun off and putting underneath my rain hood to keep it out of my face. I've got a buff. On my bottoms, I wore these like North Face zip-off trousers. These did have like zip-off legs, but I ended up losing one of them halfway through because I strapped it onto the back of my backpack to dry, and then it disappeared somewhere in the wilds. And some underwear. I carried physical real maps with me. These are the Harvey map, Cape Wrath map trail sets. There are 2 of them for the north and the south. They're really good maps. They're printed on this kind of like waterproof plastic, and they're in various sections. I think if there's any trail which you're going to carry a physical map on, the one to do it just relying on your phone for your mapping is probably not the safest thing on this, because it goes through some pretty remote and wide countryside, so it's always safer to have some physical maps with you. Then we have my backpack. So this is this Gregory Focal backpack, which I got to take on the Kungsleden. It's pretty good. The one downside to it is the hip belt is slightly too large for me. I've got quite a narrow waist, so I've made this hip belt expander thing out of some spacer mesh and some foam, and then I've sewed around the edge and then stitched it into the hip belt which came with the backpack, and it definitely helps make it much more comfortable. In these pockets here we've got a little monocular for looking at things. It's pretty handy. When it gets wet, it fogs up, so sometimes I couldn't use it, but overall I was glad to have it. A midge head net, which was absolutely essential. This is something I again made myself. It folds up into its little storage bag thing. So I went in September, where the midges are generally less bad, and my experience of them was that they were not awful, but there were a couple of times, a couple of camp spots which were maybe a little bit more sheltered, the day was a bit damper, where it was really useful to have this. With sunscreen, this is a Factor 50 child size one from Boots. There were some pretty sunny, hot days, so this was essential to keep your skin safe and healthy. You've got a compass in here, which is always a good idea to have. Then water bottles. So I've got this metal Clean Canteen water bottle, which would live on the front here, strapped onto this carabiner, and that's about 900 millilitres. We've got this sort of like flip top water bottle, which I would use as about 500 millilitres. and I would go and put electrolyte tablets in it, and this would be my kind of electrolyte water bottle. This is my like dirty water bottle with my Soya Mini on it. So this is what I would use to collect raw water with and then filter it with. And this is one of these kind of tips from like the American backpackers. So they use these smart water bottles over there, but you can't really get them over here. So the nearest equivalent is this kind of like Acti pH water bottles you can get from Tesco's and Holland & Barrett, which they're good solid bottles, and they can squeeze them well to sort of like force water through the filter. You don't necessarily need to filter all your water everywhere, but I think it's better to be safe than sorry, so I generally treated pretty much all of the water that I got. Just could be unlucky and it would be a really rubbish way to end your trip. These are my trekking poles which I took with me, which are really handy for walking on boggy ground, etc. I've got a trekking pole tent, so they were also my sort of tent poles. Really, yeah, good to have with me. They're aluminium. I've got two slightly different ones because I lost the other one of this earlier in the year, and I had this old one which I replaced the handle with like a cork handle. You can find these on eBay if you search for them. Took the foam handle off and slid it down, and then I epoxied this onto the top, and it's been great. This is my first foam sleeping mat. This is a bit of 3mm Plasterzote foam. I bought a bunch of this because I'm getting into making my own sort of outdoor kit. It doesn't weigh very much and offers a little bit of extra protection from the ground if it's kind of rocky. Again, this is another tip from these American backpacking kind of culture, which is where it's like a sheet of Tyvek to act as a ground sheet underneath my tent, and keep the sheep shit and deer shit off it, and just add again another level of protection. This is my tent. So this is a Durston X Mid. It's a trekking pole tent. It's just a really excellent tent. You can find loads of stuff online about it. I'm really happy with it. It's a good purchase. I think this is probably going to be my forever tent. Like, I don't see the need for me to replace this ever. It's just a really good tent. Here we've got the various pegs that I took with me. So these are a mixture of these Robbins Y stakes, some slightly smaller kind of Y stakes from another tent that I have, and then two small kind of titanium nail pegs. And generally these were fine. On some of the rockier places they were a little bit trickier to kind of get in between the rocks, which is where these were more helpful to have with me. Got my spade for digging cat holes to go to the toilet responsibly. I've also got this little water bottle which has got my travel bidet Culo Clean type thing on, which is just a much better alternative than carrying toilet paper around with you, although I did have toilet paper, as you'll see. In this back pocket I had the waterproof cover for my backpack, and then a pair of waterproof trousers which I wore occasionally when it was really wet, and these are just cheap ones from I think Mountain Warehouse, and they're absolutely fine. This is a little bit of sponge to help me with washing up. I would go for something a bit more scary. This is more absorbent. Occasionally food would get burnt onto the inside of my pan, and it would have been good to have something with a little bit more kind of scrub to it. And then in this top pocket I would carry a variety of different things. Generally, like, I'd have snacks for the day up here for easy access. Got some gloves, came in handy occasionally, charging cable and a double charger in here. Earplugs, useful when you're staying at a hostel or in a bothy and people are snoring. These are some headphones so I can listen to music. And now let's start going into the inside of the backpack. So there's this inner pocket here which I would keep kind of electronic type things in. It's got my head torch in, which is a Alpkit head torch, and it's good. It's got a red light mode, which is handy for not wrecking your night vision at night. This dry bag here had a power bank in. I took a 5000 milliamp hour one. My phone's got quite a lot of battery to it as well, and I find that if I put it on airplane mode, I can easily get 4 or 5 days of charge out of my phone, and that's with also taking like videos and photos on it as well. Then main compartment. This is my food bag, and this is another make your own gear type thing. So this is sewn out of silicone polyester, sil poly. Massive upgrade from the kind of drawstring canvas bag thing that I had been using previously. I obviously had all my food in here, just some kind of like special bits I had. I took an AeroPress with me so I could make myself fancy coffees. Bag here which has various bits and pieces in, lighters, spices, these kind of bag clips for sealing up bags of crisps, etc. This little bag has the filters for the AeroPress in. Got this black plastic cup which I use to drink out of. This bag here was my sort of like cheese or messy things bag for when I bought like a block of cheese. Cutlery, this is like this Sea to Summit plastic cutlery set, and it's nicer to have an actual spoon and a fork and a knife rather than some kind of mix in between them. And these they weigh nothing, and they also sort of like clip together. What else in here of note? I carried a thing of olive oil with me, so this is like a 200ml plastic pouch type drinks bottle which I bought on eBay, and I filled with olive oil to kind of put on my meals and cook with and just boost the calorific content of them. I kept it in its own plastic bag just in case it leaked a little bit and got everything oily. In terms of volume, this could comfortably carry sort of like 5 days worth of food. I would go and hang this up in bothies when I stayed in them to keep them above the ground and away from any mice or rats which were living in them. This is my stove. This is a like Sea to Summit alpha pot type thing. So this is very similar to the one that I had when I went on the Kungsleden. I sold that one and went for the smaller version because the other one I found like wasn't really using the full capacity of it. It's really good. It's got this folding handle. It's got a little sort of like clip-on lid to it. In it, this is my stove, which is this Alpkit remote canister stove, and is really good. And these bits of foil are kind of like a windshield that I've made out of just kitchen foil. Gas. This is a 230 gram thing of gas from Decathlon. The annoying thing is it didn't fit inside of the camp stove, but apart from that, I mean, it was fine. I've not used all of this, even though I was out for 17 days. I'd have a coffee in the morning, and then in the evening I'd use it to cook my meals, so I was quite sparing with my usage of it, so I wasn't going through like a ton of gas. This green dry bag is my kind of medicine and like toiletries bag. So in here we've got a Ziploc bag with like medical bits in, ibuprofen, painkillers, all of that, like plasters, etc. A roll of KT tape which I picked up halfway through when I injured my ankle, and I don't know if this actually does anything. I think it's probably just pure placebo, but it seemed to work to get me through to the end. Travel toothpaste and toothbrush. So rather than doing the stupid thing where you go and like file your toothbrush down, just get one of these like travel toothbrushes. They're so much better. They go and like clip out. I got this from like a Sainsbury's on the way, and it's great. It's like protects itself and keeps your teeth clean. A little tube of toothpaste. I sent myself one of these in a resupply package, so each one of these would probably last me about 7 or 8 days. Biodegradable soap which I'd use to shower and to wash my stove out when I needed to. This black tub here contains moisturiser, which might seem like it's quite a extravagant thing to bring with you, but unfortunately I suffer from eczema and quite dry skin, so for me this is an essential thing to have with me for my kind of own well-being. And we've got some other dental stuff here like floss and a little thing of interdental brushes just to keep everything clean. I also have a razor which I picked up on my kind of like time off. And this wasn't because I shaved. I didn't shave at all. I got a magnificent sort of beard, but it was to shave my leg so I could apply this KT tape, because it doesn't adhere very well if you've got hairy legs, and I have quite hairy legs. So I did a bit of leg shaving to make sure they would stick. A travel towel, this is a Sea to Summit towel, and it's pretty good. I'd use this when I went for like washes in rivers and things, and showers at campsites and hostels, and it dries well and it's light and doesn't smell too bad when it's wet. Then we come to the kind of inner stuff. So to protect all the kind of critical things from getting wet, I put them in this like plastic bag here, just as a kind of extra layer of defence against the rain. So this has things like my sleeping bag in here, which has got a second layer of defence in, so it's in this pump sack for my inflatable sleeping mat. This is a Vango down sleeping bag. It goes down to about -8. It kept me comfy and cosy. Obviously it's down, so you need to really protect it from the moisture. I also have a sleeping bag liner in here to again boost the kind of temperature of the sleeping bag if I needed it, but also stop it getting dirty from myself, so I wasn't washing a huge amount. This is my sleeping mat. It is a Robins, it's an inflatable one, and it's pretty comfortable and pretty warm. Thing of toilet roll in a plastic bag. I mean, I've had my travel bidet thing, so I don't use this a huge amount, but it's always handy to have if you've got like a nosebleed or whatever. The inner to my tent, so this was the inner to the Durston X-Mid, which I kept in here just to keep it dry, because generally when I packed up, it would, even after rainy days and condensation, this would be pretty dry, so I wanted to keep it that way. A bag full of like extra spare clothes. I had a kind of like sleeping set of clothes. That was a t-shirt and some underwear. I had a kind of lightweight technical t-shirt which I sent to myself in a resupply box at Ullapool. Next time I will carry something like this with me, because it was quite hot at points on the start of the trail. It would be nice to have something a little bit lighter to wear. This is a hat that I had with me. I didn't wear it a huge amount because my puffy jacket from Decathlon has a hood, and so I would generally use that rather than get this out. Occasionally there were times where it was quite windy, or I'd gotten a little bit cold walking in the rain. And then likewise we've got some thermal bottoms which I wore I think maybe like once when at the end of the trail when I'd gotten cold trying to hitchhike. These are some merino underwear which I'd swap, a kind of like walking pair which I'd swap out each day. And then I also had some little kind of like merino wool socks for in the tent to keep my feet kind of warm at night if I needed to. This bag here is my kind of emergency bits and bobs bag. It has a kind of extra water bottle for the soy mini in case I ever needed more water capacity. It's got a repair tin which has got like sewing stuff in and super glue and like repair tape for tents and sleeping mats. It's got a transfer valve to transfer gas between gas canisters if I needed it. Various bits and pieces like straps for my bag, matches in a waterproof container, some additional plastic bags. These are chlorine water treatment tablets which I took with me as a kind of backup in case anything happened to my filter. And also the soy mini, you have to go and like squeeze it and use it, and it's a little bit time consuming, so sometimes I would get water and then just put one of these in and wait like an hour for it to do its job, rather than sit there with the soy mini, squeezing stuff out. I had a dry bag with a little notebook and an e-reader in it. The notebook I got from Etsy and was nice and small. The e-reader was a Kobo, which was also great and has a little backlight. Did quite a lot of reading on this trip in the evenings. I had the guidebook in digital form on here as well as on my phone, and the guide was good, well worth having. Unfortunately, I left this dry bag on the train home from Scotland. Really annoying to have lost it, mainly because the notebook had my journal for the trail in and loads of sketches and stuff in. I also had a mini travel pot of pseudo creme, which I use on my feet at the end of every day. Dries them out, moisturises them, and helps to heal any blisters. Really important on a walk like this where there's a good chance you'll have wet feet all day. Finally, I had a day's worth of spare food in a bag at the bottom of my backpack in case I was delayed for any reason, such as heavy rain causing river crossings to be impassable. That is it in terms of everything which I carried with me. Weight-wise, I was somewhere between 8.5 to 9 kilos base weight. Fully loaded up with food and water, my backpack was probably around 16 kilos. On my phone, I used the following apps. Locus Maps, my favourite mapping, route planning app ever. I managed to get an offline OS Maps onto this, which was handy to have as a comparison to the physical Harvey maps. I had a rain radar, useful when you had connection, which wasn't very often. YR for weather, reasonably accurate for mountain weather. Saves the forecasts so you can view them offline. Obviously, if you're offline for a few days, then the forecast accuracy is going to drop down. I had this Film It app, which supposedly records your phone's inertial measurement data while you video, and then you can use it in a program called Gyroflow to stabilise your footage. Well, that's the idea. I spent a while fiddling with it, and in the end just used the stabilisation tools in DaVinci Resolve to produce my compilation videos, as it took about a tenth of the time and gave far better results. I didn't have one, but I think a Tide Times app could have been nice for the bits around Surleys where you can walk along the beach. This walk goes through some pretty remote areas, and I think it was the thing that I was worried about the most when I was preparing for this. Imagining 3 weeks out in the wild. Look at a map though, this isn't the Arctic, it's Scotland, and the trail goes through plenty of little towns and villages, so generally you're never that far away from transport or resupply. That being said, it is worth doing a little bit of planning before you go. You can hike the Cape Ross Trail completely using public transport. There's trains and buses to Fort William, the southern terminus. You can probably hitchhike. Cape Wrath, the northern end, is much more remote. The nearest options for public transport are Durness or Kinlochbervie. Either one is about a 20-kilometre walk out from the Cape itself. If you walk to Durness, you'll also need to cross the Kyle of Durness. There's a ferry which runs by arrangement from May to September. You need to ring the guy running it to make sure it will be there. Otherwise, it's a rough, pathless 6 kilometres around the Kyle. Durness and Kinlochbervie are both served by a bus once a day that goes to Inverness. You need to book onto this as well. You could also try and hitch a lift across to Thurso and get a train to Inverness, which I attempted but didn't work out for me. So I thought about the resupply the most when planning this. My strategy was to combine sending myself resupply parcels with picking things up at stores along the way, and it worked out pretty well. Although it's remote, there are places you can go into stores and get food, and in order from north to south on the route I walked. Fort William has a couple of big supermarkets, then it's a good 4 or 5 days to Shield Bridge, where there's a small but extremely well stocked store called Kintel Crafts. It's not directly on the trail, but at Strathcarron you could either take the train or hitch west to the Kyle of Lacouche, which has some shops, or go the other way towards Inverness and the surrounding towns. After Strathcarron, a day or two to Kinlochbervie, which has a post office and general store. Another 3 or so days to Ullapool, which has a supermarket and other shops. Then there's a 4 or 5 day section until the next town, Kinlochbervie, where there's an excellent London stores just before you get into Kinlochbervie, and there's a spa in the village itself. Finally, Durness has a really well stocked little shop there. Campsites, hostels and hotels will usually hold packages for you if you stay with them and you ask nicely. I sent 2 resupply packages to the Strathcarron Hotel and to the youth hostel in Ullapool. The one I sent to Strathcarron was smaller than the Ullapool one. As well as food, I had things like more electrolyte tablets, a spare t-shirt and some little treats for myself like fortune cookies. Once I'd planned myself out a schedule, I then used that to plan out what to include in my resupply parcels. I'd never prepared a resupply parcel for myself, so it was a good little learning experience. Meal-wise, it was mainly stuff that I'd prepared myself, with a couple of those pre-made hiking meals too. The majority of the hiking meals I got from the Wandering Chef, a small UK company who makes vegetarian hiking meals. They were pretty good, the cashew katsu being a standout. For the rest, it was meals that I'd got together from recipes or simple staples with additions. I also used some recipes from the American hiker Andrew Skirker. His breakfast oatmeal recipe was really good and was what I ate most mornings. His polenta stew was also pretty tasty as well. There are various different things to consider depending on the time of year that you walk. It is possible to walk it throughout the entire year. I mean, people do it in the winter. Spring and autumn are good choices, balancing the weather and the midges. One thing to consider is in the late summer and the autumn is that stag stalking begins, and there can be restrictions related to this. They don't typically affect the path of the trail too much because it's so well walked. What it does affect more are the bothies, some of which are owned by the estates and may be closed during the stag stalking season. A couple that I passed were closed, and a few I had to ring the estates to check if there are restrictions on them. Check the Mountain Bothies Association website for the specifics of each bothy. In addition, from the end of September, some places start to close down for the winter. The ferry over the Kyle of Durness runs from May to September. When I finished, it was in the last couple of days of its operation for the season. Something else to consider is that the northern end of the trail lies within a military firing range, the Cape Wrath Range. The military posted firing times for the range online at the start of each month. These are apparently liable to change, so worth checking when you get closer to the range. There's a phone number for a range control you can call to check, and when I called a couple of days before Cape Wrath, they were really helpful in confirming that there was no firing happening. The village of Durness also has an online notices thing which show the planned firings for a kind of greater time period, but I'm not entirely sure how accurate they were because they didn't really match what the MOD website was saying. I started thinking about walking this trail at the beginning of the year and then spent quite a lot of time preparing. I did a lot more planning than I'd done for previous trips. The first thing I did was work out how long it would take to walk, planning out a rough amount of days based on my previous experience and finding good places to stop each day. Then I added a couple of extra days leeway to my expected time in case things went wrong, which was a really good idea. You don't want to get close to the end and not be able to finish it because you run out of time or have to rush to complete it. Flexibility is the key. I used this rough itinerary to work out my resupply and how much food I needed to take. Ended up making a spreadsheet with all my food in, which was really helpful. Then there's the preparation, which was basically making sure that I was fit enough to enjoy the experience. Part of this was doing as much walking as possible. I started a habit of having a long walk every weekend, somewhere from 25 to 40 kilometres, making sure I would go up and down hills as much as I can as well. Once I actually knew that I was going to go, I started carrying my backpack filled with water bottles and tinned food to get used to the weight of the pack that I'd have. Incorporated a little stretching and strength exercises for my knees and ankles too. I went and did a few long weekend trips down to Dartmoor as well, where I practiced walking and navigating on some of the boggier and more pathless sections of the moor. Got to try doing river crossings, which was helpful, because I knew I'd have to do them and hadn't really had the opportunity to try doing them before. So the total costs for my trip were roughly £850. Breaking this down into categories, I spent £219 on travel. This is mainly the cost of the train travel to and from Scotland, also includes the various ferries and the bus from Durness to Inverness. £89 on accommodation, a couple of campsites and 2 nights at the hostel in Ullapool, which I planned to have a rest day at. Ended up only staying for 1 night because I had the time off to sort out my ankle earlier in the trip and the weather in the coming days was going to be good. £152 on eating out. This covers things like coffees at cafes, fish and chips, pints and other meals. £148 on resupply. This covers picking things up for various shops along the way and the contents and the postage of the 2 resupply parcels I sent to myself. £20 of miscellaneous expenses, getting laundry done, extra insect repellent, candles to take the bothies. £215 on recovery. So this is the 3 days I spent off trail in Inverness recovering from the injury to my ankle. A cheap hotel room, food, medical bits like an ankle brace, KT tape, etc. As you can see, this added a significant extra cost to the trip. For me though, this was worth it because it meant that I didn't have to go home and I was able to eventually complete the trail. This is definitely not a route to go on as your first long distance hike, but I wouldn't let its intimidating reputation deter you if you're thinking about it. All the good stuff happens when we step out of our comfort zones. Our channel has a couple of other videos on the Cape Wrath Trail that you can check out. Otherwise, happy hiking and stay tuned for more adventures.